After 200 hours, I still have no idea what I'm doing.
Mister, what's a tariff?
Okay, are we talking about tariffs in Victoria 2, EU4, or Victoria 3? Because they all have different tariff systems.
I mean a tariff in real life.
Wait, they have tariffs in real life? Howdy gamers, grab your econ textbooks that you still have from your freshman year of college, because we're talking about tariffs. 2 quick disclaimers. 1, I'm going to try to keep the actual facts/econ discussion as politically neutral as possible, so if you're a true American patriot, don't click off. I might give my opinion here and have my soy liberal memes in the video, but overall, the information itself is going to be apolitical. 2, I only took 2 econ courses, and most of my info is from an old textbook and Wikipedia, so take what I have to say with a grain of salt. Before we start talking about what is a tariff and how most cases they don't work to solve their intended goals, I want to address something important very quickly. Protectionism and self-efficiency aren't right-wing or left-wing concepts. Liberals, conservatives, populists, fascists, socialists, and even the shogun of Japan have all supported these concepts. And there are niche cases which these policies might be needed, which will be addressed later in the video. The whole political aisle has fallen for this trap, thinking if you restrict trade, it will increase the efficiency and prosperity of your country. Very left-wing politicians like Bernie Sanders have been huge advocates for protectionism, because his goal is to protect workers. But then you have very far-right politicians like Reagan denouncing tariffs and trade wars. Here's a clip about Reagan talking about wanting to avoid a trade war with Japan about a dispute over semiconductors.
But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. But the Japanese semiconductors were a special case. Indeed, throughout the world, there's a growing realization that the way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition.
It almost makes up for him committing treason. But my point being is, you can still be a conservative and be against tariffs and think free trade is a good thing for American jobs, just like you can be a conservative and not like Trump. And I want more moderate conservatives like Romney and John McCain, because even though I'm a liberal, ideals are strengthened by the challenges they endure. You want a good faith opposition debating you on why a policy or belief is a good thing. Okay, we can finally talk about tariffs. So what is a tariff? It's actually very simple. Tariffs are a tax on imported goods from a foreign country or entity. The effect it has on our supply and demand graph is a bit more complicated though. But let's look at a standard supply and demand graph first. Let's say you have a country who is completely isolated. You can see their price equilibrium where supply and demand intercept with the consumer surplus, green, above the line, and the producer surplus, blue, below it. Then let's say the country opens up and you can buy jelly beans at the world price of $1.50. The demand increases, and you can buy more jelly beans, and there's a larger consumer surplus with a smaller producer surplus. However, this is overall good, because your overall economic surplus, yellow, is bigger now, which means society is getting more economic value than it would have not trading. But then, let's say, a pro-jelly bean farmer politician wins the election and imposes a 50-cent tariff on the beans. The new economic surplus, pink, is now smaller than the previous one, and even though you're gaining more producer surplus back, you're losing out on overall economic surplus. And if you look below the intercept, you can see the tax revenue generated by the tariff and the dead weight lost because you made the jelly bean market less efficient and consumers can't purchase these beans anymore, and you reduce the consumer surplus and the amount of beans purchased because of the new price. And this graph can be caused by other factors like quotas, trade sanctions, and other forms of taxes. Dude, I didn't understand any of that. But that's okay. All you need to know is tariffs might increase producer surplus, but decrease consumer surplus and overall economic surplus, making economies less efficient. Also, I linked a Khan Academy video in the description, which might do a better job explaining it than I did. And even though tariffs don't work as a fix-all solution for job markets and economies, which will be covered next, overall, there are still niche use cases. A famous case of this has been Haiti, which was covered briefly in a Hoser video, who you guys should check out. Back in the 1980s, Haiti was able to grow most of its rice self-sufficiently, but the US was trying to push free trade around the world, and after getting them to reduce their rice tariffs down from 35% to 3%, Haitian farmers were no longer able to compete with the lower tariff. And since Haiti didn't have access to the modern infrastructure and equipment, for example, an American farmer has, because of the historical consequences of state rights, their domestic rice production crashed. And because of their low literacy rate, social mobility, these workers weren't able to switch to different professions, and since Haiti doesn't have proper industries, they couldn't back up this new trade, which is one of the dozens of problems contributing to Haiti's economic situation. Another niche case use of tariffs is one for national defense. You probably want some form of industrial base, energy self-sufficiency, and food self-sufficiency to protect yourself if a conflict happens. However, a lot of people forget the US is the world's largest manufacturer before China, and that the US is the world's largest arms exporter in the world, making up 43% of the market, while China only makes up 5%. And if you look at the conflict in Ukraine, it looks like quality is going to win over quantity. If a couple of javelins and drones can stop whole entire armored regiments, crapping out as many Cold War armored vehicles as you can isn't going to win you World War III. And now we can finally talk about tariffs and protectionist policies aren't viable strategies and don't work statistically. Firstly, tariffs are used as a solution to a lot of trade and economic fallacies. The biggest one is that free trade with less developed countries suppress your wages in your country and you will lose jobs in your country to foreign countries. This statistically isn't true, and the opposite has happened. When you want to protect industry X, let's say steel, when you try to protect steel from foreign competition, your goal is to increase the chance for employment/investment in this industry, which may or may not happen. But this is only a snippet of the story. When you impose tariffs, you are decreasing foreign sales, which means they have less of your country's currency, which means they import less from you as well, and this is if they don't retaliate with their own tariffs as well, which means employment in every other sector involved in foreign markets decreases. So even though you may or may have not protected steel jobs, this, however, causes your overall employment to decrease. Secondly, this might not even happen because with increased prices for the consumer, since the tariff is a tax, the consumer has to pay. The consumer might end up consuming less because of this, which means there might be less demand for steel, because if a farmer who can't sell to a foreign country now loses his job, he won't buy a new tractor, and if he doesn't buy a new tractor, the tractor factory, which doesn't sell the tractor, won't buy the steel. Thirdly, and this point is political, American conservatives will cry crocodile tears about inflation and try to blame opposition, but then enact policies like this, because foreign demand for a currency helps reduce inflation. Here's an example. I assume y'all know from history class why you can't print money, Weimar Republic, hyperinflation, etc., etc. Well, let's say you have country A and B. B wants to do trade with country A. If they want to do business with country A, businesses will need country A dollars. So they exchange country B coins for country A dollars. So they have a reserve of foreign currency, so their businesses can exchange currencies and do investment, etc. Oh, look, it's the supply and demand graph again. Oh. See, foreign countries wanting reserves of USD because we are a net importer and they want to sell us stuff helps reduce inflation because there's more demand for our currency, which increases its value. Which brings me to the next point, which is the manufacturing versus services, real economy versus fake economy. I'll try to explain this one as simply as possible. Remember how we talked about niche use cases for protectionism and tariffs, and wanting an industrial base for a nation's security is important? That's true, but not every country needs to produce toasters. What do I mean by that? There's 50 states and 350 million Americans. If someone said every state and county needs a toaster factory and to be self-sufficient with toasters so we can protect workers and have real jobs, we need real Rust Belt jobs, not fake desky jobs. Who even is account receivable? He sounds dumb. You would say that's silly. We have 350 million Americans, and for example, only 2% of those 350 million Americans are farmers, because that's all you need, and there's more important investment opportunities elsewhere. You don't hear New York City saying, oh no, nowhere Nebraska has more farmers than us, we're losing, look at their farming industry, they make so much more grain than us, because that'd be silly, because there's better things to invest in New York City than farming. So to turn around and say, oh no, China's making more toasters than us, we are losing, is silly, because for example, the USA produces half the world's pharmaceuticals, and a $1,000 pill is worth more than a $10 toaster. Should we do more things to protect low-income blue-collar workers? Yes. Should we abandon white-collar industries to just protect blue-collar industries? No. Do conservatives support universal education, a public option, UBI, a sovereign wealth fund, or any kind of social safety net to protect these workers? No. Progress in technology is a net good. Manufacturing jobs have been on a decline since the 1950s. Why? Because white-collar workers produce more economic value in an office than a blue-collar worker does in a factory. Another point that I wanted to bring up, which I briefly mentioned earlier, is that being a net importer is bad and trade deficits are bad. This just isn't inherently true. For example, the USA imports a lot of raw resources and intermediate products, which we use to produce final products. For example, let's say I import $100 worth of wood from Canada and I produce $1,000 worth of furniture from it, and then sell it domestically. Our trade deficit is $100, but my question is, so? If countries are willing to sell us resources and parts so we can produce more expensive and profitable things, then let them. Having a trade deficit isn't inherently a bad thing. Like I mentioned earlier about toasters, there's going to be 7 billion people on this planet, with almost 200 countries depending on who you recognized. Every single country shouldn't have a toaster industry. That is not a sufficient use of resources and isn't going to help humanity/consumers. There are bigger and better opportunities for us than going back to sweatshops to make t-shirts because we want a positive trade balance. And my last couple points are this. When people advocate for protectionism, isolationism, and tariffs to protect jobs, and then say we will adapt to the labor costs by automating all this labor with robots or AI, or you don't need a new smartphone, we just won't buy a new one, having a trade balance is more important. My main question is this. How is any of this protecting jobs? Not buying a phone or having a robot build a phone doesn't get people jobs building phones. Trade wars don't get you anywhere. We can't think about trade and economics in the terms that there needs to be a winner and a loser, because this just isn't true. Both parties in a deal can mutually benefit from trade. Trade is what helped grow America into a superpower and what got us these jobs in the first place. I wanted to bring up a couple points before giving some final thoughts. First, in economics, there's a term called economic substitutes. Let's say you have an educated consumer in a competitive market, and the price of Coke goes from $2 to $3. They might go and buy a store brand soda for $1 instead. The issue is if you place tariffs on every country and product, the price of goods will rise everywhere. So if the price of sugar, plastic vehicles, and energy, etc. goes up, so will the price of the substitute. And if the standard of living gets more expensive, people might just buy less and have less of a standard of living instead of just buying the substitute because they just can't afford anything else besides just having a lower standard of living. Lastly, I wanted to bring up two historical points. one being the American Revolutionary War and the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. Remember in middle school history class how you were told part of the reason Americans declared independence was the phrase taxation without representation? Well, a lot of these taxes were tariffs. For example, the Sugar Act. The Sugar Act in 1764 imposed duties on sugar, molasses, and other goods imported into the colonies from Britain. And I would also like to put this snippet from the Deck the Halls of Independence, where our forefathers explicitly wanted to protect trade. For cutting off trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent. Lastly, I just wanted to bring up the 1930 Tariff Act passed by Hoover. Shout out to all my Kaiserreich fans. Let's feed Elon to Gwartney, Africa. But the reason I'm bringing this up is this. In response to the Great Depression / stock market crash, we thought we could restart American industries by restricting imports, but all we did was increase unemployment from 8% in 1930 to 16% in 1931. But we also helped reduce world trade by 60% by passing this act. And my final thoughts are this. A rising tide lifts all boats. Canada imports 1/3 of its goods from the USA. So yes, if you buy cheese from a Canadian farmer or lumber from a Canadian lumberjack, you aren't supporting an American farmer or lumberjack, but you are supporting all the other Americans that Canadian buys from. Trade is good, helping other people is good, wanting free markets can be apolitical. So what is the moral of today's story? Put that Victoria slider to 100%. And I hope someone does the thing in Minecraft.
Why in the world did you attack President Kimball?
Pay taxes. We enjoy it.
Understandable.